Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back to day 2 of our symposium. For those who weren't here yesterday, my name is Maisha. I'm the project coordinator at MetTrack for the TransFormed project, and I'm really glad that all of you are here to join us today. Today's focus is on Two-Spirit communities and disability awareness. So we are going to be starting off with talking about a lot of our Two-Spirit community data. We have some guests speaking about Two-Spirit representation and misconceptions, and then we are going to get into the disability conversation that's taking place today. I'm going to shortly move forward to introduce Laura Hartley, who is the program director, to talk a bit about MetTrack and the TransFormed project. But before I get to that, I wanted to take some time to really acknowledge all of the hard work that everyone here has put into making the symposium happen, but also the fact that all of you are here attending. This has been such a long year for so many of us. I like to sometimes call it many years within 1 year. The pandemic has caused all of us to have to shift so many things online, to have to shift around our everyday structures and lives. On top of that, there has been such an increase of so many difficult things this year, class issues, anti-Blackness, transphobia. We just had Trans Awareness Week last week, and then we had TDOR on Friday. And I know for a lot of you who are Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans, that kind of thing, TDOR and trans awareness, that's every day of your life. It's not just 1 day or 1 week. So I acknowledge that a lot of those heavy feelings into this symposium. We're really glad that you're here. There's going to be a lot of difficult conversations today, obviously, because we're talking about violence and trauma and mental health. So I just want to mention that as well. So we hope that through this symposium, you take time to soothe yourself if you need to step back or step away and then come back. We really hope that you do that. The chat is available for you to speak to anyone if you have concerns. I encourage you to speak to community members as well in the chat. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna invite Laura on now to talk a bit about MetTrack and the project, and then we will move forward.
Thanks, Maisha, for that introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Hartley, she, her pronouns. And as Maisha said, I'm the program director here at MetTrack, and I've had the privilege of working alongside Maisha and everyone involved in the TransFormed project since March. I just want to say a few words about MetTrack and TransFormed for a little context as we start the day today. So MetTrack Action on Violence was founded in 1984. We're a not-for-profit based in Toronto. Historically, we were devoted to advancing safety, justice, and equity for women and youth. But with the introduction of the TransFormed project, MetTrack has expanded its inclusivity efforts by putting time, energy, and research into understanding the experiences of intimate partner violence within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And so the TransFormed project, which has been ongoing for the past 3 years, is a bilingual, community-based action and research initiative led by MetTrack, but also in collaboration with many folks in partnership with the Centre Francophone du Grand Toronto. And we're really grateful to all of our funders who have generously supported and made this project and also this symposium possible. So we'd like to thank the Public Health Agency of Canada, the City of Toronto, the Department of Justice, and the Law Foundation of Ontario. And for the past 3 years and continuing today with the symposium, TransFormed has been engaged in community-based participatory research and education with the goal of addressing barriers and increasing access to health and social supports for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people affected by intimate partner violence. So I just want to say welcome to everyone today. We're really happy to have you here joining us in this really important conversation.
Thanks, Laura. I'm going to go ahead and do the land acknowledgement now, so I will pull it up on the screen for folks so it's easier for you to follow. And then I will invite Elder Blue to start off today and give a few words about what we should really keep in mind as we're going through the day, and also to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about themselves. So METRAC's board of directors and staff are committed to upholding the spirit and intent of the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations and call to action. To this end, at the beginning of all METRAC meetings, we make a statement through which we hope to raise awareness, understanding, and respect for the traditional Indigenous territories of Ontario. We recognize the traditional Indigenous territories on which our organization is located and on which our programs and trainings take place. We recognize the failure of settlers to uphold Indigenous sovereignty of this land, and so we commit to decolonize our organization and bring this history to light. For thousands of years, this land has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by Upper Canada treaties. Today, the meeting place of Toronto, as in the Haudenosaunee word Takaranto, is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. We wish to express gratitude to Mother Earth and for the resources we are using, and to honor all of the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who have been living on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. We understand that language is fluid and living, and we respect this diversity. We're also aware that not all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit refer to themselves in the same way. Some may refer to themselves in spiritual or religious contexts, while some use regional names. So now I want to invite Elder Blue to talk a bit about how to get us started and to speak a little bit about themselves.
Miigwech, hi, thank you very much. Tansay is kinikamun na tisina kasun. Mayingin da dem Atathakuk, Saskatchewan, Eskazoni Nadunjaba, a Yahweh. So what I've done is I've introduced myself to you in the Cree language, and I've told you that my name is Earth Song, and I am from the Wolf Clan, and my family is from Atathakuk, Saskatchewan, and Eskazoni First Nation. I reside in Peterborough, and I am a Yahweh. A Yahweh is the Cree word for neither man nor woman. So it's a reclamation of our original language to our gender identity, which we had prior to colonization. And that's something that I really encourage people to look up their nation, where they are from, and find that original word for the non-binary, non-conforming people to the language that their communities knew them as, being those two-spirited or gender-diverse people. So I wanted to introduce myself first of all, and welcome you to the territories of Turtle Island, the many territories and nations that reside here, and to bring awareness to our two-spirited brothers and sisters and trans and non-conforming, non-binary conforming members of community. This is a very important subject for us. We know that, due to the systemic racism, that Indigenous people face higher amounts of violence, and those that are gender diverse face even higher numbers of violence. So it's a very important subject that we're talking about today. And today I'd like to ask those ancestors that are gone on before us and those yet to come to be with us today while we do this very important work. It is hard work. Talking about someone violating us in the many forms that it exists is very hard, and sometimes it's hard to find our words. So I ask those ancestors to help us find those words that need to be said to give encouragement and hope and support to those who have experienced that violence, and to help our presenters and our panelists today to say those very important words that need to be said and heard. We know that as we move forward in the day, that there'll be some information that may be triggering and troublesome for you. So I would ask that if you do need to take a few moments to center yourself, to smudge, to offer tobacco outside, to just sit quietly with yourself as you deal with those triggers that you may encounter, that the ancestors and the Creator help comfort you during this time. And as well, I would ask that as we speak today and we listen, that we open our minds to hear things in a way we never heard before, to open our ears so that we hear the words of comfort and kindness and compassion and understanding, even though we are dealing with an aggressive subject, but that doesn't mean that we have to act in an aggressive way or express ourselves in an aggressive way that may be triggering to some. I ask that our mouths are open in a way that we speak that kindness and that we offer that support. And then lastly, that we open our hearts so that we can be the kind, compassionate people and move forward as supports and as resources and as those that can help those that are in need. So these things I bring to you today and offer these reminders as we deal with this very difficult subject, but very important subject that our two-spirited, trans, non-binary community members have spoken about. And I hold my hands up to all those that have participated in this survey to bring forth this symposium, because it is very hard work, and we honor them and we thank them for taking the time to do this work, as well as METRAC for doing this very important work and bringing this forward to us so that we can have resources and information to be that much more wiser. So thank you for allowing me to be here, and I will be in the background listening in as I am driving on the road right now, but this is very important and I did want to be here with you. So have a great session, and until we see you again tomorrow afternoon for a closing, be well and be gentle with yourself. Miigwech, hi, Walalin.
Thank you, Elder Blue, and I hope you drive safe. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here through your schedule. I'm just going to check to see if Maulud is here from Senator Francophone, but if not, then I will invite Laura back to give you a brief kind of recap of yesterday and then to go over some Zoom functions so you're all comfortable using the chat and Q&A and all of those things.
It looks like Maulud is not here, unfortunately, but we'll see if he joins us, then we can welcome him when he arrives. And just in the meantime, I'm just going to share some of the Zoom functions for folks to help you with accessing the symposium today. So we have across the bottom of your screen, you should see a few boxes, and there's two main boxes we're going to use today. There's the Q&A box, and if you click that, you can enter in a question that you have for the panelists, and it will help us on our end keep track of the questions so that we might not be able to answer them right in real time. Sometimes we might type an answer to the question, or sometimes we might bring it up verbally, like at the end of a presentation. But if you put the question there, we'll be able to keep track of it. There's also the chat box. And so I see that some people are using the chat. You can chat amongst yourselves as attendees. You can also chat with panelists, or if you have like a technical issue or something that you need support with, you can put a message in the chat bar. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that right now you can see that Maisha has shared a PowerPoint presentation or a screen. And when that's happening, you're able to control how big or small the presentation is versus the people's faces. So for example, if you need our faces to be bigger or the interpreter to be bigger, you can actually take your mouse and drag to make the PowerPoint smaller and the faces bigger. And if you need any support with that, please use the chat to let us know, and we'll do our best to support you. And the only other thing I just wanted to briefly say, Maisha, I'm wondering if you could share the website so I can just show people that. So I know some folks were probably here for day one of the symposium, but for any folks who weren't and who are joining us new today, I just wanted to take a moment to share with you the TransFormed project webpage. To access that, you're just going to go to metrac.org, and after I'm done speaking, I can write that in the chat bar for you. When you go to metrac.org, you'll click on the What We Do tab, and then you'll go down and you'll see TransFormed project. And if you click on TransFormed project, then you'll come to our webpage. And if you scroll down on our webpage, you'll see a whole series of resources that we just launched yesterday. And these resources are great resources for community members and for service providers that give you a lot more information to support some of the things that we're talking about today. So I'll encourage you to visit the website to take a look. We have a whole glossary of terms. We have a support services brochure on where Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks can access services. We have a healthy and unhealthy intimate relationships resource designed for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And we also have a preventing intimate partner violence in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities resource that's designed specifically for service providers. We also have a resource, a legal resource on making gender and name changes on identities documents. And we also have a research report, which talks about some of the research that was shared yesterday, but also that will be discussed today. And those are all available for free to download on the METRAC website. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Okay, so before I move forward into the first session, I just want to encourage you again to use the chat if you need to talk to community members, if you need to get in touch with any of us. If you have any major concerns, I would encourage you to email us at transformedcoordinator2@metrac.org, which we will put into the chat as well, because that would be the best way for us to effectively address your concerns. Since it's a small team and we're watching so many things on Zoom, we might not be able to fully get to it. So I really encourage you to email us at that email address. Okay, so to start off, I'm really, really happy to introduce Haley Moody from LGBT Youth Line and Susan Gapka, who is a PLG member. I'm gonna invite them on to get this session started, and we are gonna be looking at METRAC's Two-Spirit community engagement data, but also looking at LGBT Youth Line's needs assessment data as well. So I'm gonna introduce Haley first. So Haley Moody, she, her. Haley is a queer, Two-Spirit, mixed race, Anishinaabe with roots from along the shores of Georgian Bay, England and Germany, and currently lives in, and please tell me if I pronounce this wrong, I probably will, so I would like you to correct me, Giche Name Week Wadong, Owen Sound, on Saugeen territory. Most of her work has centered around sexual violence advocacy and working with youth in a counseling and support role, always prioritizing healing as an act of resistance. She spends a lot of her time being critical of the Canadian colonial state and dreaming of land reclamation and youth-led revolutions. She can also be found watching ridiculous TV shows, putting maple syrup on all foods, and finding ways to connect to her traditional territory. So to get this conversation started, I will begin with going over some of METRAC's qualitative data from TransFormed. Carolina Gana, who was the researcher behind that, did such great work helping the PLG and supporting them in analyzing and coding a lot of this data. So I wanna take some time to go over that and talk about the major themes that we were able to analyze. and then I will kind of let the conversation take kind of like flow after that. Something I want, especially I think service providers who are listening, to keep in mind while you listen to this is the goal for this discussion. By presenting our data and then looking at data from our advisory committee members such as Haley, we really are hoping to increase staff capacity by identifying needs of the community through their experiences. And therefore that will lead to ensuring more equitable access. So we're hoping it increases the ability to address IPV in Two-Spirit communities. It hopefully will encourage community members to speak out more about their experiences, especially if they've had negative ones, which we know that they have, to increase access to resources and services within organizations so they can better support Two-Spirit community members, but to also encourage open sharing within organizations and agencies, which we know will improve future projects and research in this field. So to start off, I would say, what I want to say is, it's important for me to say how the interviews were facilitated and who did that. So we had a Two-Spirit community worker and a PLG member take part in the focus groups. And for the individual interview, I was present for that with Carolina Gana, and focus groups ran what I would say like 2 to 3 hours. And then individual interviews were 1.5 to 2.5 hours. And throughout that conversation, we really tried to focus in on 5 core areas, I would say. So resources on relationships, impacts of partner violence, help seek community services, recommendations for change, and then recommendations for prevention practices. And from that, the major theme that we noticed was how important it is for community members to have traditional healing approaches, to have Indigenous service providers available, and to have Indigenous approaches of healing. I have a couple of quotes I want to talk about because I think what people said really backs up that theme, and I don't want to not bring up these direct quotes. So someone from the focus group said, "Some of the practices that I found useful over the last few years were accessing traditional Aboriginal ceremonies, things like the two-spirited sweat that they have at Anishinaabe Health every month. I found that very useful, and I found that giving yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually to another entity really helped me." Similarly, someone else said that talking circles are a really good way of getting help, but that's something that they don't do very often or can't find very often. Accessing services like Two-Spirit people of the First Nations was really helpful. There was someone who gave a really personal, vulnerable account of their experience with an Indigenous service and with police. So they said, you know, personally, they would not recommend calling the police because that's a colonial system. They talked about an experience where they were at Native Women's Resource Center and they were disclosing their domestic violence situation to someone, and the case manager wasn't able to support them the way they wanted because she told them that if this person didn't leave their situation, she would be forced to call the police. And this really scared this person. So they are really hoping for more spaces where it feels a lot more culturally appropriate and that they have access to things like ceremonies, talking circles, drumming and sweat lodges. Someone else also kind of chimed in and talked about an experience of discrimination. They said the Native Women's Resource Center was really helpful and supportive to them, but when they go to other places that aren't like Indigenous service places, so many barriers come up from them, things like transphobia, Satanism, sexism. Those services are often anti-Indigenous, anti-pagan. They said they're having an issue with the subsidized housing they're in because that group is owned by a private religious institution who is further promoting transphobia, homophobia, anti-sex work, anti-Indigenous sentiments, racism. They're so aware that their experience as Indigenous people and dealing with police and services like social workers have so many barriers because those services that are meant to protect them often have not. And I want to key in on that because I think often when these conversations take place, people like talk about the police a lot and they say, you know, we need like more social workers in these places, and that's true, but social workers also partake in that violence because they that system often acts in the same way that police systems do. So that system is also something that really needs to be heavily critiqued and evaluated in order to support people better. When I was in the individual interview and talking to the community member, they talked a lot about the spaces they went to, like 519, Two Spirits office, Anishinaabe Health, Two Spirits, but I wanna focus on their relationship with their therapist, because what they said about their therapist was so positive and healthy. It was so healing for them. So the type of relationship that they had, I think, is what we really want to encourage all spaces and services to have, because the way that they were talking about it, it sounded like this person was the one who really opened them up and helped them through a lot of their questions about violence and dating and relationships. You know, they said that something really positive. They said, Two-Spirit people are known for being good with confidentiality. I know I can trust my community and my people. So when I phoned my therapist, thank God for them, there were times that I didn't want to be around. And she said to me that people need me here. So that therapist was able to break down those walls and provide that relationship and that comfort that this person didn't have. You know, they also don't, they said that it's only them and their sister, so they have no other family and nobody else that they can really talk to. So these relationships with, you know, social workers, with therapists, with providers are so, like, we see how critical it is to people and how much of a difference it can make when it is a positive and healthy experience. On the other side, in that situation, you can see how much of a negative impact it has when the space that you're going to and opening up to about so many things in your life are not able to support you because they don't have cultural education about you, or they don't, like, they didn't make time for that. They don't have cultural sensitivity. So listening to this community member talk about their therapist really stood out to me. It was really important for us to note down. You know, they were saying that they talk about their family a lot, especially near the holidays. It's really hard. We are in November right now. Last November was around the time that, like, these conversations took place. So now I'm thinking of, we're coming up to the holidays again, and what kind of impact that's having for people who don't have family and friends. They talked about how their parents' relationship, although healthy, did have violence, and that stayed with them, but their parents were always able to work through it. So ultimately they saw a healthy direction of how to work through violence, and that really had an impact on them in the relationships that they partook, like, that they were a part of from that point on. There was a key quote that also stood out to me. They said, "My dad survived residential schools and he never talked about it. He took it to his grave, and that was never brought up or talked about with my therapist, but with my therapist, I say whatever's on my mind." So I feel like we got a lot of information about how internal wisdom and family wisdom impacts community members and how that stays with them as a resource. So they're using that family information as a resource, but they're also wanting other resources. This person said, I want more spaces where I can access traditional healing, but I also want to know about, like, what do I do when violent or unhealthy feelings come up in relationships? What do I do with that? Where do I put that? I would like spaces where I can go to do, like, kind of physical things like boxing, so I can take out my anger, but also learn healthy ways of what to do with my feelings, because I never want to take that out on my family, friends, or the people that I love. I see so many community members have this conversation of, like, yes, we want support and safety when we experience abuse, but so often, you know, that there's a cycle in that, right? People will also get unhealthy or violent feelings, and they want to know, what do I do with this? I don't want to pass this on. I don't want to carry on and, you know, keep pushing forward this, like, cycle of pain. And I think there's so much complexity that around that isn't fully addressed in so many spaces and organizations. So that theme of, like, traditional healing spaces, but also a diversity of resources being available in spaces is what we really noticed from the focus groups and the individual interviews. And I want to say all of our participants were between the ages of, like, 40 to 60. So they're in, like, they're elders, they're in, like, a later stage in their life. And Susan and I were talking about, you know, Susan really brought this up, the concept of eldership, how elders are treated and supported in Indigenous communities versus how they are treated in Western communities and what kind of impact that has. I know, Haley, you're going to talk a bit about like the data that you have from youth, but I think it'd be really interesting for us to talk about the range of ages and how to support people in different stages of their life. You know, and I won't say too much because Susan is going to speak a little bit about this, but you know, also we were talking about role models and like elders, like Two-Spirit elders being role models, especially if they didn't have role models growing up and now they're in a stage where they're wanting to give back and provide that healthy perspective. So Susan, do you want to speak a little bit? I get into a little bit of detail about that. I didn't get too much into it because I want you to.
Thank you, Maisha. As soon as I find the mute button, I'll go. Let me set the timer. So my name is Susan Gapka. I use she, her pronouns, and in français, elle, s'il vous plaît. And I do want to introduce the concept of trans elder. And when I was half my age, I never expected to live this long. The life expectancy of trans people in like South America is about 32. I can't remember the specific country, but I think that can be generalized in some way. And I'm trying to find my place in all of this because we live in a colonized society where you're either too young to make your own decisions, not old enough to have enough experience, or too old to be worthy in society. So I really connect with the term elder that is more common in the indigenous communities the more I learn about it. So thank you for the opportunity. About a year ago, I was asked to be on a trans elders panel at Moving Trans Histories Forward in Victoria, British Columbia. And it's hard to get there because it's expensive. And, but they said they would cover my expenses. And so I said, yes, I will be a trans elder, but I'm still trying to sort out all of that. Now that conference has now gone online in March, which is, yes, I'll be there, but I don't get to enjoy Victoria. But in 2004, the common term trans now, I had the good fortune with Rupert Raj to sort of create that as sort of an umbrella term. It's documented in the Trans Health Project with Ontario Public Health Association. And transgender, historically, transgender and transsexual were contested terms. Transsexual comes out of the transsexual phenomena by Dr. Harry Benjamin, who was not a trans individual, but attempted to help people who experience this phenomena in a significantly psychiatric and medical context. And Dr. Virginia Prince, who coined transgender, which is much more common, had an aversion to any surgical procedures and called it mutilation. So there was some intense political debates about that. So the term trans, and when you was something that I'm very attached to. Its identity is very personal, it's intense, and when you're trying to find your way in the world, can be very, very important. But I learned also in a project on best health guidelines with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, Albert McLeod talked about pre-contact. And we didn't have, I learned, and I don't know how accurate or correct this is, but I am interested in learning more. And so thank you for those teachings. Talked about pre-contact, there was no binary terms of men and women, male and female, but also that non-binary wouldn't have existed without binaries. And we use this term when I was coming out of genderqueer. So that really, the light really went on for me about how that operates. Because when we look at the TransFormed data, we see that queer, in yesterday's presentation, queer and non-binary identities are much more common than terms like trans woman, what I would identify as. But so now we're back, and with about a minute to go, because I'm using a timer here to have some conversation. But again, back to a colonized society that is binary. We have men in a patriarchic. To understand how patriarchy and colonizing works, how sexism operates, you need to have a dominant set of the population and a subservient part of the population, and not a lot of room for movement around. Just taking a look that I've got, not talking too fast for the interpreters, and not a lot of room for youngsters and elders. But so my final point is around role models, and what does that mean for an elder? I grew up without role models. Who are my elder role models? And who is teaching and learning when we've had to fiercely carve out our own path? But I also want to ask how someone like myself can be a better, a more understanding, a more kinder role model for trans and non-binary and two-spirit youth, so that they can know that they have a future and that existence and survival and thriving is possible. Thank you for listening. I appreciate the opportunity, and good luck with the rest of the conversation today.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, Haley, I wonder, in your data, like, can you speak to a little bit about like if any of these themes or any of that kind of came up when what you saw, what people were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. First, just want to thank everyone for letting us be here, and also like thank the elders and the older folks that are here today. I work for a youth-based organization, which means I'm hanging out with young folks all day, which is amazing, but it's also really, really lovely to be able to share space with older folks. So Chibagwach for being here and for sharing. It was really grounding to hear from you, Susan, and from you, Blue. So Miigwech for that. Yeah, I guess I'm just going to also provide a bit more context of the work that I do, just so folks know a little bit about LGBT Youth Line. So LGBT Youth Line is a provincial organization in Ontario. My work capacity there is the manager of provincial programs, and I've been there for about 2 years. But prior to that, I did work at a sexual assault center for almost 5 years. Again, it's like explicitly working with young folks. Predominantly BIPOC folks, in a counseling and crisis and advocacy capacity. So that's kind of what brings me here today. Maisha, I'm actually wondering how much time I have and if it would be helpful for folks if I shared my screen just for a couple of minutes to show some of our data from our research from last year. Would that be okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like 6-7 minutes.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So let me just bring that up for folks. All right, can folks see my screen? Yeah, I'm seeing nods, perfect. Okay, I'm just gonna make this a bit bigger. So folks can access this. I can put in the link in a bit in the chat, but it's just youthline.ca/publications. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about our 2S LGBTQ+ needs assessment, specifically in relation to Indigenous youth. So last year, we had an amazing group of youth ambassadors who are volunteers throughout the province of Ontario, who came together and developed and facilitated this needs assessment for what 2S LGBTQ+ youth needs are across the province. So we did this through surveys and sharing circles, so some online, some in person. This was before COVID. And we had almost 1,200 youth respond, which was really amazing. And then based on that population size and based on that data, we actually broke out our reports to include 5 snapshot reports and 1 summary report. So it was really important for us as a team at Youthline to make sure that we were prioritizing populations that are often not
part of mainstream conversations. So we have specific snapshot reports that only cover that specific population and the data from that population. So for example, the one you're seeing now is our Indigenous one, but we also have one that's just for trans, non-binary, two-spirit folks. We have another one that's for racialized folks, another one that's for Northern youth, another one that is for youth under the age of 18. So we do have a series of these reports that you can access on our website. So this is just directly from our website. I'll go, oops. I'm gonna go to the first page. It's actually very short. It is just like the snapshots are just one page graphics. And I want to name too, like I know we're talking about intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, but just to name that this was more so just about the needs of 2S LGBTQ youth. But when we are talking about Indigenous youth, because we do live in a colonial society where, to be honest, Indigenous folks are hated, and to be like the other side of that too, where it's like we're talking about trans, two-spirit, non-binary and queer youth, again, like experiencing homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. So when you're combining those two things, I would definitely argue that Indigenous 2S LGBTQ youth experience violence on a daily basis, just literally based on their existence. So I'll say that, but that sounds really sad too, but also just a shout out to all the Indigenous two-spirit, trans and queer youth that like, you're beautiful and lovely and amazing and resilient, and so happy that you're here. So just to provide a bit of a snapshot about what folks were saying. So we did have 144 participants that are Indigenous, which includes First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. And so you can see, oh, sorry, folks. You can see that we've broken out our data. So one of the first questions is how Indigenous youth take care of their mental health. So we gave them a list of different options, and these were by far the top two across all populations. So talking to friends and self-care. So what this looked like on like a graph, you'll see in the summary report in a graph, it shows that those two bars were like so long. It was like the strong majority by like 80% were like, those are my top two choices. And then there was a significant drop when folks were like clicking off other options. So for example, accessing services and supports were like, you know, like something like 60% less likely. So just to name that, like most Indigenous youth, most Indigenous 2S LGBTQ youth are actually relying on each other, and they're relying on themselves. So I think that's really important to name. You can also see throughout here too, there are like numerous quotes that you can see folks have included from the sharing circles and from the surveys. So changes Indigenous youth would make to their communities. So number one, by far, needing spaces and events where Indigenous youth can meet one another and build connections. Number two, specific programming, including spaces that respect cultural identities. Number three, health resources, including mental health, access to doctors, and substance use support. And number four, just generally educating the community. So again, those are kind of like what we expected, but I think important to name. You can see here too, this little stat that says 58% of participants say they do not feel a sense of community, which is very sad and alarming to hear. And again, naming like community is so important, especially when folks are experiencing intimate partner violence. Like they need to be able to rely on their community. And if 58% of 144 youth don't feel a sense of community, what does that mean in terms of supports? So I'm not going to go through all of this because I know we don't have a ton of time. What I would like to identify just down here in the bottom right, what Indigenous youth would say to people who are making decisions about their lived reality. So these were like the top three responses that were said over and over and over again by these 144 youth. Number one, listen to us. Youth know what they need. They don't actually need like adults in decision-making powers making decisions about their lives. They know what they need, they know what's up, so listen. Number two, we need real systemic change. So Indigenous, Two-Spirit, trans, queer youth are living in incredibly violent colonial systems. There needs to be systemic change, like harm reduction, of course, but also like the systems need to change because they're not working, and our youth are dying and being murdered and are not okay. And number three, we need free, safe, sober, Indigenous only community spaces. So again, lots of 2S LGBT spaces. I think especially in like more rural and remote communities and like northern communities, they tend to be very white. So having space for Indigenous folks where people can relate to each other and have like a similar level of understanding of what it's like to be an Indigenous young person. So yeah, that's just a little bit about this report. I encourage everyone to go check it out. Again, there's lots of like quotes and stuff in these reports. You can download them for free on our website. So just wanted to share a bit of that, and I can stop screen sharing now. So another thing I just wanted to quickly touch on before my time is up is we are talking about intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. And just to name the direct correlation between resource extraction and like land development, quote unquote, in relation to violence that Indigenous folks experience. So just naming that, you know, folks, I'm assuming have heard of like missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks. And I encourage everyone to learn more about what that looks like. There's so many reports now, so many studies. I suggest not reading the ones by the police, but reading others. My favorite one is Violence on the Land, Violence on Our Bodies by the Native Youth Sexual Health Network and by Women's Earth Alliance. So you can see in there that the highest rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit folks is where there is mass amounts of resource extraction. So for example, right now, the tar sands in Alberta, that is where the highest numbers of folks who are missing and or who are murdered. So saying that there is a direct correlation between those two things. So while we're talking about violence, gendered violence, gender-based violence, it's important to reflect that like Indigenous Two-Spirit folks don't just experience this violence because like, oh, what do you know? They're just more vulnerable. It's actually very intentional. It's strategic on the part of the state. They don't actually want us to survive and to thrive and to hold our sacred spots in our communities. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that, and to give a shout out to all of the youth across Turtle Island who are holding down land back camps right now, and who are on that front line and who are experiencing so much violence in the hands of politicians, of police, of military, of local organizations, including not-for-profits. So just naming that for folks that are in this field of gender-based violence, like that's also part of your responsibility, is learning about those things, advocating, sending resources, like looking for ways that you can support, because that is one of the ways that Indigenous folks are being targeted, including like young Two-Spirit and queer and trans youth, because those are the folks that are holding it down. Yeah, so that's that. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, and I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing all of that. Everybody needs to be able to hear this, and I you know, it makes me think of like we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's what I'm thinking of, and the key wording that stuck out to me is you're saying that it's intentional and strategic, like that needs to be a part of the conversation. You know, everything I went over, what Susan talked about, what you went over, you're right. Nothing is just happening out of the air. Everything is intentional. And for us to have these focus groups and interviews where community members are coming in and saying, this is what I'm going through and experiencing, and for the resource that you just showed, for youth to have said and been so open and honest, because that's so hard. It's so hard for people to talk about that. I really hope the service providers who are listening today are not just here to listen, but are taking that call to action and taking this back to their organizations and to look at their mandates and policies and look at the way that they're supporting Two-Spirit clients and patients, because clearly there's a failure on everyone's part and it's still ongoing and taking place. And I'm hoping what you just said and what we said is going to move us forward into seeing that change and turn out differently, no matter how long it takes, because it's the hard work after the symposium that's really what matters. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us here. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Susan. It really means a lot. And I see that in the chat, Laura's typed in some of the resources that you mentioned, so folks can look in the chat if they want to go back and look at the names. And we will link people the resource that you just showed as well, so people know where to find it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So up next, we have Keith McGrady from Two-Spirit. So I'm gonna take some time to introduce Keith, and then Keith can come on and get let you know a little bit more about what he's gonna talk about, and then yeah. And folks, I just wanna say everyone's doing so well. I know sometimes the screen may freeze or things may go on, so I appreciate your support and patience in that happening. Hi, Keith. So Keith McGrady grew up in the community of Binjiti Wabek Zagin Anishinabek and relocated to the GTA over 13 years ago and now calls Scarborough home with his youngest of 4 children. Keith has dedicated his life to supporting the goals and dreams of Indigenous communities, particularly in Toronto. Initially, he focused on children and youth programs and eventually expanded into Indigenous education, trafficking, physical literacy, housing. Advocacy and leadership also comes with his identity as a two-spirited person. It's not just a sexual orientation or a gender identity, he says. It's also my role in my community and a place in our circle. As the executive director of Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, Keith's goal is to walk alongside the 2S LGBTQ communities and provide education and support to members of the Two-Spirited community and reclaim their place in the circle. So I will now let Keith take the spotlight.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, well, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me here. I think, you know, one of my favorite things about speaking with people is that I believe we all have, you know, the answers inside us. You know, what we need to know to live our lives, to walk our paths, and we have what we need to share with others to help them walk that same path and live their lives. And so I believe that I'm here for, you know, a reason, and this is why whatever happened to connect us today, we're supposed to be here in this chat. We're supposed to be here on this Zoom. You know, we're a lot of us are really frustrated with the COVID and the style. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us to sit back and think about what we're doing as a society, what we're doing as people, you know, to the earth and the resources that we have, but also each other, and reconnect and regroup and, you know, decide where our priorities are, especially when it comes to communities that are most vulnerable. We in leadership, I've been, you know, fortunate to be in what the Western society calls leadership for so long. It's been almost 20 years. And I noticed that a lot of the people in these leadership rooms are, you know, when I was in early childhood, my field, it was dominated by white, middle-aged, straight women. And, you know, they only have the perspective that they have. So as an Indigenous male, someone who's younger, someone who is, you know, identifies as gay, really had a different perspective, and my voice was forced so often to be the brave voice, and have the voice that makes sure that we're not forgetting people. And then I moved into this field of HIV work. Two Spirits, unfortunately at this time, was fully funded when I arrived with HIV money, and so a lot of the work didn't really give us opportunity to address the needs of the Two Spirit community. It was the very specific needs of a community that are stricken with HIV, and obviously being scoring poorly in the social determinants of health in every way. HIV was one of them. So it made sense that this existed, but the way that people see health and compartmentalize it really needed to change, and that's why I knew I needed to be here in this role. We need to look at health holistically. We need to look at families holistically and communities. We also need to allow people to define who their family is and define who their community is. And so that's kind of what brought me here and brought me here today. I've learned so much since COVID. We had to regroup and be very nimble to make sure that our community is serviced in a way that's meaningful, but also, remembering that there's so many people that have different needs, very unique needs. And, I've worked in this HIV field for 2 years now. And I also know, I thought there would be a lot more diversity. And so I go into the rooms, there's a little more visible diversity, but a lot of the leadership is by now straight, older, gay men. And again, these tough conversations are forced on me. I'm usually the only Indigenous person there. I'm usually the only person that has a different perspective about, the way that we could service people with dignity and respect, not leaving people behind. Today, I was in a meeting with leadership when they're talking about a new gay men's health hub. The way that they so simply try to define what a man is, because of what they know or because of what they focus on and highlight. It's really, really exhausting to have to keep saying the same things and not have people really shift their focus or their understanding of what, these definitions are that people like us are a lot more familiar with, or at least more open-minded. Today, someone said, at this gay men's health hub that we can get people to scan a QR code when they get in. And I'm like, okay, who has a phone? From your experience, who has a phone, because that's who you serve. You serve other gay white men who have access to these things. And I said, I'm so tired of this. I'm tired of this lens where you leave people behind. You forget people, the most vulnerable people. And so one of the things I want to say is, I get myself in a lot of, a lot of people get uncomfortable around me. And I think I just heard someone say, we got to get used to being uncomfortable. I don't think it's getting used to it. I think we just need to start demanding that people change what they're doing. So today I said to them, why do we focus on making everybody welcome in this hub? Why don't we focus on the people we keep forgetting? Because white people have felt comfortable and welcome everywhere they go. They will walk into any circumstance and feel privileged because they've never felt uncomfortable. And so I want us to, be strong. And if, again, I'm not trying to offend anyone who in this room who's white, because I know that, if you're white and you're trans, well, you definitely have a very similar experience that relates to the Indigenous experience or the, people of color, or the Two-Spirit experience. And so as I come here and talk, this is kind of what I do. I talk about what's in my heart, I talk about what's in the moment, and I talk about what I feel. And but on the second hand, obviously I have things prepared to talk about. I mean, a lot of people really want to know what does it mean to be two-spirited? And what I say to them is, I have a definition of what two-spirited is. I have a teaching of what two-spirited is. It is only my teaching. And so people could take these teachings that we share with each other and basically take what they want. Hey, this Keith McCready seems like he understands what he's talking about. Usually I give a definition of like my life experience. I tell people that I'm a father of 4 children, 19 to 25. You know, wonderful children that are, you know, we've broken the circle. I was one of the first to go to high school and graduate from college, and now my children are as well. And that's not typical in my community. I talk about things like, you know, I was a young Indigenous man who really didn't understand my sexuality, didn't really understand the teachings I was given. I was sexually abused. I think it's important people to know that, because then now they listen to me differently. They hear that, hey, I could connect to this person. I know what I look like. I know that I look like this big butch man. Everyone treats me like a big butch man. In fact, it's gotten me a lot of, I got away with a lot looking like this. And this is what I use. I use this reality of who I am to make sure that I influence people, but also change the way that people think about what we're doing. It's a lot, there's a lot of work to do. And, you know, I'm really excited that young people are a lot more brave. They have more opportunity because of things like social media, because of things like the way that they connect with people a little easier. You know, there's a lot of bullying online, there's a lot of negative things, but there also is a lot of positivity happening. And I think what we need to do as a community is to harness all of this and make sure that these things are the focus with our community that we want to work with. You know, being two-spirited, I remember, well, the interesting thing is I could tell you my journey. I came out as a gay Indigenous man when I was 26. I already had 4 children. I don't know that I was confused. I think I just didn't want to be gay because to me, men can't love you, men hurt you. You know, why would I want this? And so I acknowledged that these are feelings I had, but I was certainly not going to be gay because men can't give you what a female can, because females have role modeled to me kindness and, you know, all these things. So my experience was very different. And so when I came out, I was very bold. I came out the same day to my kid's mom. We were together in a relationship, although she was quite aware of some of these feelings that I had. To my mom next, and my family, and then to my staff, and then to my friends, all in the same day. And I told people, I'm just giving you information that you need to change how we interact. But I said, but I'm not asking for your permission. I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm not asking for your input. I'm just letting you know that you're going to see things a little differently than you're used to. And to me, that was the day where I realized that all of these things that happened to me in the past really had nothing to do with me. You know, I was a young kid who knew I had to leave the reservation because there was a lot of harm there. You know, I experienced a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of violence. I knew I had to leave. How could I leave? The only thing I could do is, you know, go to high school, which nobody else was doing, you know, get on that bus that took 2 hours there and 2 hours back and finish so that I could leave. And I left. And as I left, I really had one goal in life, and that was to be happy. And when I was 26, I was happy. And that's when I, you know, came out as a gay man. But I didn't come out as a two-spirited man until I was about 39. And I'll tell you why. My understanding of being two-spirited, I was actually very fortunate because I was raised in a small reservation, about 150 people. But there was a two-spirit couple living in my reserve. So, you know, very unique for a small place. There was also 2 other two-spirited men living with, you know, opposite sex partners. And my father was very open to that. And I had an aunt who was trans. Her name is Mona Hardy. I'm not sure. She's quite famous, you know, as far as in the Indigenous trans community. So if people know her, she's my mom's first cousin. And so I got to see a glimpse of something that might be positive, right? Even though I didn't have a positive experience with men. And so as I came out, I really wanted to work with young people so that they didn't have the same experience as me being, you know, being abused and being teased. You know, it was this common thing in Indigenous communities to tease people about sexuality or something that they see. So people saw me. And, you know, luckily I was quite witty and very bold. So I kind of just fought it all off. And, you know, as people tried to tear me down, I was quite combative with, you know, how I could make sure that I was still proud of who I am and didn't have to deny it. And so what I understood of being two-spirited, that it was a role. My father gave me some good teachings along with another elder, his name was Jeff Chief, about being two-spirited. And I saw it as a role. And so I never really identified as two-spirited because I wasn't ready to take on that role. And then as I got a little older and working in the community, people would identify me as two-spirited. And I would say, oh, I'm not two-spirited. Indigenous gay man, because I wasn't ready to take on that role. And when I took on the role of two-spirited, I knew that I would be able to have these teachings and be able to, you know, manifest this vision of like what my path was and what my journey was. I was already doing two-spirited work. I knew this. It just took a little more bravery of me to acknowledge this. But it also came with acknowledging my own gender. And so a lot of people don't realize that I don't necessarily identify as a male, but I've been told that I'm a male my whole life, right? And so I identify as two-spirited. And I don't say it out loud very often because I feel that at times I get judged for this, not necessarily just by the greater community, but the trans community and the two-spirit community. I didn't have any role models that looked like me and acted like me. I had a lot of people who were very feminine, you know, like my uncle, you know, was extremely feminine, the people in our community. And so I thought that's what two-spirit was. You know, I thought you couldn't be like me. In fact, I have a lot of friends who, and I'm using the word feminine to describe the way that, you know, society sees femininity, not the way that I see it. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful and forcing these labels, but I'm just saying we all know what people think feminine is. And so I started to, what really changed for me was when someone said to me one day, "What's your pronoun?" And I had no idea what that was. I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, "Well, what's your pronoun?" And I'm like, "Can you," and they're very impatient with me. They're like so annoyed that I didn't know. And I'm like, they're like, "You're two-spirited and you don't know?" And I'm like, okay. So I asked someone else because they didn't want to explain to me. They were like frustrated. And I asked somebody else and I'm like, "Oh, okay. I don't know. Let me talk to my mom." And my mom is my elder. My mom is my heart. She will always, you know, give me the feedback that I need. She would always talk to me about how I knew what I need to know. I was very confident with what I knew, but at that time I wasn't sure. And my mom said, "Well, you know, your whole life, you know, people call," well, so I have a given name, a name just like anyone else that was given to me by an elder. And that's another long story, but I also have a self name that I gave myself, and it's Mahogany. And when I was young, I wanted people to call me Mahogany, and I didn't know why. I just loved the name. I'm like, I want to be called Mahogany. And some people called me Mahogany. They were like, Keith Mahogany or Mahogany, Mahog, you know, how people start surrounding me. And I carried that, and you know, it kind of disappeared for a while, and then came back. And as I was talking to my mom, she was like, "But people already know that you're a she sometimes. People already know that this," and I'm like, "Yeah." And then she was like, "But people already know that you're also a male." And you know, all these things. I'm sorry, am I way overboard or something? Oh, so
no, you're doing great. People are just enjoying your talk.
Okay, sorry, I saw a message that said, "I know you're not done sharing, Keith," and that's all I saw. So I thought I was like overtime. And
no, you're great.
I have a really good reputation for going over. So anyways, I was saying about my mom, and I was like, okay. And so I decided that I don't have a preferred pronoun because I want people to see me how they see me. So if you see me as a male and I'm he to you, I'm okay with that. You don't see me fully, that's fine. But if people see me as she, that's also fine because that's what you're paying attention to. But you know, and sometimes the ideal of they, it makes sense to me. Yeah, it all makes sense to me. And I'm not saying that other people should feel this way. I'm just saying this is what I've settled on. And if I change my mind, that's okay. Maybe I will change my mind. I don't know. Right now, this is what I am. So I tell people I don't have a preferred pronoun. It doesn't mean I don't have one. It just means right now, I want you to see me how you see me. And I will appreciate it and acknowledge it just the way you just acknowledged me. And that's why I think being two-spirited has a lot to do with our spirituality, about our identity, the way that we have the capacity to acknowledge those spirits within inside us. We have the male spirit and female spirit, but also that it's a role in our community. I stood up. I have been standing up my whole career. And I feel like it's a privilege and honor to walk beside my community. I tell people I'm not here to tell people what their choices are. I'm here to make sure that people have choices and they have the resources and they have the ability to expand their understanding of all these things that they want to know. And also to help them, you know, get the answers out. We have the answers, I believe this. I've always had a, a special place for people who work with, the most vulnerable people. And when I say most vulnerable, I don't mean in a disrespectful way. I just mean, the people who are not given the same opportunities and privileges as other people around us. And so when I came to Two Spirits, we talked about what community means and who belongs to the Two Spirit community. And that's anyone who says, I belong. And because there's a reason. If anyone feels safe with us, there's a reason. So to me, if you are Indigenous or not, and you feel like you belong to this community, you belong to this community. If you have, love for this community, that's who you are. And that doesn't mean that's everyone's definition, but that's mine. And I'm in a leadership position, and I'm going to share that and spread that love and spread that, that joy, that there's a safe place. So again, people might not get this exact answer, what they want, what two-spirited is, but this is what I am. But if someone is gay and Indigenous and call themselves two-spirited, but don't really understand, that's okay. If they think it's a sexuality, that's right, because that's all they know right now. But my mission is to make sure that we all have the same information about what two-spirited is, and that one day, maybe it won't necessarily be highlighted in the LGBTQS spectrum, And let's put the 2S in front of that to remind us that the two-spirit people were always here, and it was always part of that, And so that's kind of what I wanted to share today. I also think, if people want to have some, time to ask me questions about things, but just remember that this is all I know. Traditionally the two-spirit role had a lot of skills. And I know I have a lot of those skills, and I know I have a lot of these kind of gifts that were given to me. Someone once told me that two spirits were special. And I said, well, yes, they are. However, we're all special. We all have gifts. So don't take us out of the circle. We are in the circle. We are an important part of the circle, but we are there just like you. And the same goes with elders. Elders are part of that circle. This hierarchy that, non-Indigenous people kind of lift elders out of the circle in the hierarchy is really dangerous. And I really want people to remember that not everybody has the same understanding of what it means to be in the circle, and be patient. As two-spirit people, we all have trauma. If you start listening to people's stories, it's really tragic that, we all have something really horrible that happened in our lives. And we wonder why, we work with people that they don't trust, and that they don't want to listen, and they don't understand, and they don't want to take your choices. And some of them only have poor choices. So which choice are you gonna make? The poor choice or the bad choice? So, and we judge people for that. Again, I don't believe my work is necessarily only to work with the greater community. I think I need to focus on the Indigenous community so that we could be more cohesive with our understanding of what being two-spirited is and where our place in the circle is. I should have read something. I didn't read anything of what I prepared, by the way. I'll pause for if anyone wants to talk about anything specific.
Thank you so much. I'm just looking in the chat, and I don't see any questions right now, but I want to just let you know what comments people are saying. Someone said, this talk is so passionate, moving, informative, and hope-giving. And the comment you saw later said, I know you are not done sharing, Keith, but I'm really enjoying your story. Thank you for sharing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. If people do have questions or anything later, how can they get in touch with you? Like, where can they reach out to you?
Well, the one thing I've done in my life is make sure I'm accessible to our community. And there's people who want, my attention, and I'm like, okay, you're not my priority. Why would you assume your priority just because you emailed me? And that doesn't include the community. The community I'm very accessible. Facebook me, if you get my number, text me. Those are the ways to get my attention. Do not call me, leave a voicemail. I can't prioritize people like that. Don't email me. Because I can't prioritize that. I'm too busy prioritizing the other thing. So the best way is, if you want to connect with me about other things specifically, decide how that is. So if it's personally, that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Professionally, not as easy, because the reason is Two Spirits of People of the First Nation is branded so well that everyone thinks we service the entire world. We get messages all over the world. We get messages all over Canada. We get messages all over Ontario. We get messages all over, but we service the GTA. So we really have to focus on that. and also we currently have like, you know, the mandate to of our Indigenous community. And what I could proudly say is that our reach has grown significantly as far as the people that come through our doors and walk and see what we want to do. And so we're very busy, just like everybody, but we're very busy, you know, kind of expanding and growing and learning together. And so, so yeah, that's the best way. We have a very active Facebook, and I'm very responsive to that because that's the way my community connects with each other. A lot of people don't have the same access to phone or email, but they'll always find a place to log in on their Facebook. And so that's what, you know, we've witnessed and I've observed. So
yeah, someone else just asked something. I have always wondered about which is the more accurate way to say the term. I remember a teaching saying it is two-spirit / not two-spirited because it sounds like a verb. What would you say is best practice?
I would say, again, you just tell people, this is my teaching. So I think it's about sharing our teachings and saying, this is what I learned, what did you learn? If it's different, you acknowledge it, accept that, and then make your own decision. Our agency is called Two-Spirited People of the First Nations. I didn't name it. I say as two-spirited people, you know, whatever, because I'm talking about a group of people, but, you know, as someone who's two-spirit, this is kind of what I was given. Someone told me this, you know, that I was two-spirited. And so that's what I use. But I wouldn't, it makes sense to me too, hearing someone say that it's two-spirit. And I think there's times when I write about two-spirit people, I say this too. So I'm not very good at being consistent as far as that, sorry.
No, I think that's really helpful. We have a few more minutes. I don't see any more questions right now, but I'll give like a minute. Maybe somebody might have a question, but.
Okay, one of the things I could add while we're waiting is I have an experience with some two-spirit community and two-spirit trans folk. And some, you know, they see this, the two-spirit community expanding here in Toronto as far as the people we service. And someone said, oh, Keith, I don't appreciate your leadership because you service so many cis people. And I said, well, how do you know they're cis? You know, like, how do they know unless you know them and they identify? I said, I want to make sure that people feel safe and that we don't force them to come out in any way, you know, just to serve our needs, to be able to feel comfortable with them. And since I've been here, many people have came to our doors as a straight Indigenous person, identifying, and then, you know, while they're with us, while they're walking side by side with us, have identified as two-spirited. And so I think it's, you know, a little dangerous to assume just the way we don't want other people to assume. So I think it's, you know, something to reflect on as far as people who we know our poor experiences, negative experiences. Why would we ever want to do that to anyone else?
Oh, there's another question. Is there a two-spirit international community? Where can we find it? Or is it more North American in context?
So I was in this role, and then within 1 month I was at the International Two-Spirit Gathering, and I was like just kind of thrown into it. I was a little bit of a diva. They were all camping out, and I'm like, I don't camp, you know. I'm not one of those people. Even though I grew up on the reservation, I was one of those little kids who were like extra, and like I'd rather sleep in the car and then in the tent. And so that was my first experience. And so there's been some international work, but it seemed like it's focused on North American. And since I've been in this role, we've been, you know, reaching out. Some people have reached out to us internationally, and very specifically, it's mostly people who consider themselves Indigenous that have reached out to us, not other agencies that consider themselves two-spirited. We have a lot of people who write to us who are incarcerated that are two-spirited. And so we recently have a volunteer writing and being a pen pal to them. But so far we really have, it's not I don't know the organized way, but there is a brand new organization that I was part of, you know, kind of helping lift off the ground. It's called Two-Spirit in Motion, and they're a national organization. They just, you know, we just got funding for them maybe about 1.5 years ago, and they're doing some work. So check them out. They have a website and a Facebook as well.
Okay. yeah, I would say to folks, if you think of more questions through the day from this talk, reach out to Keith exactly how he said. And if you have any questions you want to relay to us, we can also relay back that way, whatever you feel is best. Keith, thank you so much for being here and for sharing so much of your teachings and experience and knowledge with us. It means more than I have the words to say, but I learned so much. And I think everyone else did as well. The comments are really positive, and I feel like people are learning a lot. And I hope the Two-Spirit community members who are listening in really found a lot of comfort in your talk, and from Haley's talk before. Thank you so much. It means a lot to us.
Okay, thank you. And also Sage, who's our supervisor at Two-Spirit, was supposed to be here, but she had to focus on something else, so kind of a bit of a miscommunication. And so I just sent her regrets, but also please, if you want to know more about what we do, check out our Facebook page and our website. There's a lot of things happening there, a lot of resources for the Two-Spirit community right now. In fact, we have 10 days of winter solstice coming up, where we'll have 10 different days of events, all facilitated by community members. And the last day will be a celebration of people's talents and things that they have in a kind of sort of concert. So if it's something that you want to check out and get to know some of the resources and oh, that's not our website, sorry. So I inherited this agency with no access to this website. So it's twospirits.org now. And until I guess the payment's done on there, it's gonna exist. I've tried to get, oh, you wouldn't believe what I had to deal with. But anyways, it's another story. Okay, thank you for your time. I actually have so much on my plate today. I can't even stay, which I would love to. I got to witness a bit of it when I signed in, so I appreciate it, and I apologize that I'm not able to stay. But,
that's okay. We're recording each day, so when we have that up on our webpage, whenever you are free, you're able to look back on it that way.
Okay, thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so for this last portion of the day, we're going to move into talking about disability awareness and having that conversation. I'm going to invite Felix on. Oh, Felix is here. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how the session is going to go. I will share qualitative data that I thought was really critically important for us to be able to share here today. And then I'm going to move into kind of more, I guess, themes that kind of stemmed out of that data. And Felix and I are going to talk a little bit about not just our data, but also our personal lived experiences, recommendations and things and suggestions that we have, or pieces of information that we thought were really key and important to mention. So I want to say, before we get into the conversation, just to remind folks, similar to what I said earlier in the day, our goal for this is really, when we're sharing our data and sharing our experiences and sharing this information, we're really hoping that for those of you who are service providers, you're really taking this back as a call to action to increase your staff's capacity to be able to support community members, to increase your ability to address IPV in these communities, to create a space where you're encouraging community members to speak up about their experiences, because hearing from community members are really the only way that we are going to be able to create change, because we need to hear from them and know what's working and what isn't. And to, that will lead to the increase of resources and better supports, and hopefully open sharing. We're really trying to encourage open sharing amongst organizations and agencies, because I feel we're stronger that way and work is more solidified that way. So, that really is going to impact how future projects and research get improved, because although we have all of this information and data that we can work for in a call to action kind of way, there's still so much research that is missing and work that is missing that we still need to work hard towards. So I really want you to keep that in mind. And when you're signing off, not just forgetting everything and all the hard work and labor that people brought up here, but to really take that back individually to yourselves, but also to your organizations. So what I would like to start off with is going over some of the qualitative data that folks brought up in our interviews when they were talking specifically about disabilities and how that impacted their access to services and supports. We had a lot of folks talk about their experiences as deaf community members, and you know, we were lucky to be able to do outreach to so many deaf folks. I want to thank Kylie Brooks, who was really behind that and doing that outreach portion when we were trying to find folks for surveys, focus groups, individual interviews. That labor and hard work from Kylie really was able to get us to this place where we have these experiences from folks and where I'm able to now share that back with you. So similar to you know, the two-spirit data, we had core questions that we really tried to focus in on during the focus groups. And some of them were, you know, what type of information on healthy relationships or abuse in relationships were people looking for? So some folks said that, you know, they were seeking supports as a deaf person. Participants said that they had really limited access to interpreters and a lack of accommodation for deaf people who were seeking crisis supports. Someone else said that, you know, they really recommend and suggest that there is more deaf interpretation and ASL video counseling available, or ASL crisis lines, so that people can access those for immediate support from violence. Participants recommended having services in first language for deaf people who are seeking supports in critical situations. Some other suggestions that I really want to key on are having deaf ASL interpretation symbols, Braille symbols, accessibility symbols, so the person who is seeking support does not require, like they don't have to do a lot of searching around for whether or not these services are going to accommodate them. That should be really visible, so people don't have to work hard to see, can I come here for help? Is this a place for me? Someone else recommended having remote video webcams for hotlines. Again, more crisis lines. We're in a place now, especially this year, so many things have moved online. Participants mentioned this, and this was last year. They were saying, we're in a world where so many things are online. I should be able to access counseling and crisis support online if I need to, through video, audio, however that is. So for those who can't physically go somewhere to access that, they don't have to be kept from accessing support just because the only thing that's available is to physically go out and get help. Another question was, you know, did participants raise any cultural or like intersexual insights that we should keep in mind and be aware of in developing interventions, future health promotion tools or workshops? People talked about their intersectional identities. Someone said, as a deaf person, in general, there are not a lot of resources available for deaf people. There aren't enough interpreters, there aren't enough hotlines, there aren't enough experts that someone can escape to from a domestic violence situation, where they are then able to sit down with a counselor or a social worker. They said, you know, in short, their access needs have not been accommodated or met. I mentioned before the concept of like so many barriers with police systems, but also with social workers. That was brought up again. Someone said, I didn't call the police or social workers because I was afraid they don't know how to sign. Plus, this person's experience as an indigenous person is that they have already all these barriers to services from people who are supposed to protect them, but that has not been the case. So being deaf and then being indigenous and then having that trauma and fear of how police and social worker systems work, all of these barriers kept them from going out and accessing the support that they needed. So with that, those experiences in mind, I wanna now like move us into this conversation of talking about peer group models and things for us to keep in mind. So Felix and I, you know, we were talking about what experiences have been like with this peer group and in general, like your personal experiences accessing services and supports. So I'm wondering if you want to share a little bit about that. So what you've liked about certain places, or if it's hard to talk about what you've liked because there isn't a lot of things, what you want to see more of or what you want to see is made more accessible. I want, you know, getting into like different access needs for people.
Well, so yes, Felix, they then pronouns for me. I think the conversation around accessibility has to be a big one, simply because there are so many different kinds of access needs out there. Like we talk a little bit about deafness. we didn't have interpreters available during the meetings, the PLG meetings. So then I'm looking back wondering how many deaf people perhaps wanted to join but couldn't because they couldn't access the space. And I think a lot of places, they say, oh, we can offer certain accommodations if people flag it. So this kind of, you have to disclose to be able to access services. And the issue with that, the issue of requiring people to disclose, is that a lot of people don't want to. A lot of people don't have the language, especially if they don't have an academic background. And a lot of people, they view people differently. I remember when I was speaking at a different conference, everyone, it was at a university, everyone was like, yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. And the moment I mentioned that I was autistic or that I was multiply disabled, they're just like, what? And there was that moment of just like looking, and they're just like, because of internalized ableism, they're still thinking like, well, what's wrong with you? And some people actually asked, well, what's wrong with you? And it's like, whoa, I don't know you, rude. Just like people ask a lot of questions, there's a line of questionings about trans bodies. There's a lot of similar line of questioning for disabled bodies and neurodiverse folks, because people, I guess, are naturally curious. But it also kind of plays into that entitlement where we feel that we need to know everything about someone to be able to serve them. You don't. So yeah, like back to the idea of what makes a space accessible or not, or what I would like to see. I would like to see more consultation with disabled folks, and held in a good way that's not extractive. I think a lot of the information gathering is that occurs currently in nonprofits, in other service provision. It's very extractive. It's exploitation, because you are questioning people on their areas of lived experience, often that intersect with trauma and other marginalized identities. And they're not really getting anything out of it. Like often disabled people will have to flag and go through all kinds of intellectual, emotional labor of explaining to organizations, hey, here are these issues, only for those organizations to then kind of portray those disabled folks as being reactionary, as being the complainers, as being that person. And I think a lot of trans people also have similar experiences where they're just kind of cast off as, and women, and people perceived as women have that like, oh, well, they're just being hysterical, they're just like complaining, they're being a bother. And we're such good organizations for like giving them crumbs. Meanwhile, the disabled people, the trans people, the otherwise marginalized people bringing this up for sometimes years or decades, get nothing out of it. They don't get the recognition. They don't get the letters after their name. They're just those annoying community members. Those are in air quotes, for those who may not be able to see. So yeah, I think that we have a lot of work to do, especially in the social services and health sectors, on serving disabled people. And beginning those conversations with them will be vital, and compensating people for their work is another issue. I'm just processing a little bit.
Yeah, I think I want to say like what you said about spaces being accessible and like disclosure. I'm thinking, I know when we were thinking about what is important to mention in this session, we talked about creating like an environment. Well, there's two things: creating an environment where people feel safe enough to disclose to whoever like the leader is in that space. Mm-hmm. But also you had a really good suggestion, which was list the access things that you like a space already has, and then ask what's missing. So you can tell me if I'm wrong, but to me that's coming across as like people are free to openly say what is missing without directly saying this is what I need.
Yeah, we had this conversation on the phone a couple days ago. Okay, I remember now. Yeah, but as an organization, by listing, hey, these are the things that we are doing to be accessible, it shows a willingness to engage, to try to do better. I think a lot of organizations, perhaps out of like the need of needing to appeal to funders, or the concern around that, a lot of them will say, oh, well, we're thinking about accessibility, therefore we done it, we're good now. And a lot of people are afraid, whether both on an organizational level and also on just on an interpersonal level, we're afraid to be wrong. We're afraid to say, hey, we messed up. We're afraid of being hashtag canceled. So a lot of that us result in just like, we deny it. We deny that, oh no, we've never been problematic ever. It's like, no, all of us are problematic on main. It's a matter of kind of putting our ego aside for a minute and say, how can we do better? So by listing, hey, okay, so we don't have fluorescent lights. And also, if you have fluorescent lights, try to get rid of them. Just because, like, one, no one looks good in fluorescent lights. So, like, all the queer divas are going to, like, avoid you. And also, it just gives people headaches. But for people who suffer chronic migraines or who are autistic, that's just, it's sensory hell. So, like, really listing, like, hey, we have deaf interpretation. We have accessible fonts, like even when we're typing, like communicating back and forth through emails, sticking to like Calibri or Arial, avoiding fonts with serifs for those who have like dyslexia or dyspraxia where letters don't make sense, like BPs and Ds all look the same. The struggle is real. So yeah, just kind of by listing the things you have available, people can say, yes, they can either see themselves that represented, or they can see where they're not represented. And then because it's kind of like a conversation going on, they might feel more comfortable bringing that up to you when they see that'll be received.
Yeah, because I think that really shows that the organization or the space or the person in charge is really doing like their end of the work to make sure things are available. I'm even thinking of like programming spaces and workshops, like the way that things are physically placed in rooms, the way that materials are placed out, sounds, like you mentioned sensory, like the sounds that are available in rooms. Like I've heard from participants and other folks in different, who've gone to different programs and workshops, that these are things that aren't really like considered as much. It's like a deeper level of consideration, right? There's a lot of surface level consideration maybe. And something you said about like people messing up and needing to make amends for that. I think there's a lot of service providers here. I think the need to really deeply care, being uncomfortable and like realizing you're going to mess up, but then focusing on how do I support the people that I'm trying to serve, because everything is a learning opportunity, and to feel like you are being directly like attacked or this is about you is taking away from the person that you're supposed to be serving or supporting.
And I think a lot of organizations, and I've seen this in so many different capacities, whether it be racially, whether it be in terms of transness or ableism, organizations have taken, oh, we're learning as a, well, we're learning, pat on the back, like giving themselves a gold star. Meanwhile, the marginalized person is sitting there is like, I'm still being hurt, I'm still being harmed. There's still this, service providers are still like prioritizing themselves and their reaction or their like emotional responses in those situations. When, as much as we are all still learning, we still need to be accountable and recognize that when we cause harm, people are experiencing that harm. People are being emotionally impacted by that harm. They're gonna hold that harm and take it with them as they go home and have dinner or whatever they do after that, like after that interaction. Like they have to have that burden with them. And that's not to say like don't try. It's just be conscious that when someone brings something to your attention, it is actually them trusting you enough to trust in your capacity to actually address it. It's actually a gift when someone calls you in. And I think people need to be mindful of that when trying to be more accessible or inclusive in any capacity.
Yeah, I really like the way you worded that. It really is a gift when people are trusting you enough to first of all, trusting you enough to call you in or out, however someone wants to describe it, to say that this isn't working for me. But I also see it as someone is like supporting themselves by letting someone know this isn't working for me. And that's what we want everyone. We want everyone to be able to do that. That's why at the beginning I said, like, having these conversations, we want to encourage people to speak up about what isn't working for them, or else, you know, that change in that conversation is not going to take place. So when people are saying this isn't working for me, what a great thing, because then now that's the call to action to be like, oh, I have more work to do. I actually have to look into this more, or oh, I have to rethink what I set up before. You know, I'm thinking about what the participants said. Like, they're saying, I'm scared to go somewhere because I don't know if they have people who can sign, or if they can even access people who can sign to support me. Someone like said, they're worried that when they go to places that the space isn't going to consider all the intersections of their identities. So their gender, their race, their class. If they're deaf, someone said, you know, like, are they going to consider that I'm Indigenous, migration? What about like the invisible disabilities? And this, I know to a lot of service providers, this seems like so many things to consider, but that's the work. Yeah. You know, that's the hard work that has to take place.
And also just on receiving feedback, a lot of people are like, okay, I'll receive feedback, but it has to be nice and it has to like make me feel held. No, sometimes a call-in is them using expletives and like call it like saying, you're being awful to me, and maybe some swearing, and like that. I mean, it'd be great if they could outline it a little bit and give the specifics, but sometimes a call-in looks like that. And we have to be ready that like sometimes people are acting from their own places of trauma and pain, and not just punish them for it, because having access to the words and terminology around accessibility is a privilege that a lot of people don't have. And yeah, like I know autistic people specifically are often punished because we tend to be blunt as all hell. And that by shaming people for not reacting in the way that you wanted them to, because they're not like giving a TED talk in that moment, because maybe they're just done with your ableism or what have you. It poses a barrier because it's tone policing and it's respectability politics. And yeah, I do think that people should be able to call you in that capacity, and that as service providers, people and organizations should have structures in place that make people feel empowered. Because with this, we see a lot, rather than direct confrontation, and we are living in a kind of confrontation repulsed culture, a lot of people will just ghost. A lot of people will drop off. Like I know even the Metrac PLG had quite a few other disabled folks on throughout, but there's been that slow decline. Where people would just say, you know what, this project is too much for me. I'm not sure I'm going to be held for whatever reason, or like what I have to say will be actually acted upon in a way or a time frame that I need. So they just leave. So I would encourage organizations to examine who is showing up, and who isn't. And this isn't to say that the people showing up are necessarily like super privileged. A lot of people, specifically coercively feminized people, are there not because they have so much privilege, but because we are so used to being exploited, where we're just like, you know what, if someone has to do the joke, or not the joke, someone has to do the work. So I guess I'll do it, because if not me, then who? So yeah, I guess just being mindful of the various power dynamics at play, and doing specific targeted outreach to the people who aren't showing up.
Yeah, doing that targeted outreach, you know, like we talked about that during our webinar yesterday. That's one of the like solutions to kind of dealing with this, is making sure there's visible outreach done into communities that aren't as represented as much, or having a hard time being represented in these spaces. I'm thinking even for service providers, like to make sure that they're listening to folks and doing the work that they need to do, but having an ongoing evaluation of like how well their systems and services are working, and also making sure service providers as a like it's a team effort. You know, there was something brought up where if one person is just made to do all the work, oftentimes maybe a two-spirit, non-binary, or trans disabled person in place is made to do all that education and educate their staff and do all that work. What happens when they're burning out? What happens if they leave? What happens to all that information, that good work? It cannot be just placed on one or two staff members. People in higher up places, they have to work to support their staff because staff need support making these changes. They can't do it by themselves. I think there's a question in the chat for us. Oh, no, it's just a comment. Someone said they'll be, it was just something you were saying. They said they're definitely going to be implementing that in their current work. So it's great.
Excellent. Yeah, because
there is a question in the Q&A box if you folks want to take a look at that.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so someone said, can you recommend some resources that list some of these accommodations? I had never heard of the challenges with like some of the fonts that you mentioned.
I'm just trying to think. Like, I know it's not entirely related to disability, although it did touch on that. I was recently the project coordinator of the Toronto Shelter Network Gender Diversity and Safety in Shelters project. I'm probably messing up the name, sorry. But on their website, the 37-page report is up, and it touches on like trans and gender inclusion in the shelter network, or sorry, these shelter systems, which also includes emergency shelters and whatnot for people experiencing intimate partner violence. So I would definitely recommend checking that out when you have some time. It also includes like a kind of restructured SMIS intake form, which a lot of organizations can use. And it includes a section where you can tick off if you have autism or like things of that nature, which can be important to flag. I know this isn't the question exactly, but a matter of accessibility could be really thinking what happens if someone goes nonverbal? Do you have those supports in place to accommodate that? Like some people, like a lot of autistic people out of stress will just not be able to communicate verbally. So like, is there a pen and paper you can write things down on? Is there a tablet to type with? Or even something like something with larger fonts. And this is not just an autistic thing. Some people have vision problems. But like clear and simple fonts on like what services do you need right now. So if you're like in a crisis provision type of work, and you're dealing with someone who's experienced intimate partner violence or sexualized violence, it's kind of like, okay, well, here's some clearly outlined options for you. What do you need right now? Because I know the fear of calling the police or having the police called is so real for so many disabled folks. And for autistic folks, especially those who are racialized, there's the fear of being institutionalized for it, or being straight up just murdered by the police, which we've seen in the past year, unfortunately. So yeah, I would also recommend, as a matter of access, really examining your policies around engaging with the police. Like I know, I'm trying to remember what they're called. There is this initiative in Toronto and I think elsewhere about creating alternatives to the police, or at least people who can come along with police as like a mental health support team. I would recommend looking into those as well. I know the Gernstein Clinic is not a disability resource, but they are also a mental health resource that are particularly useful.
Yeah. And I think just as we wrap now up, I want to say that qualitative report that MetTruck has from this project, that will be shared soon to the webpage. So that has direct quotes and recommendations from folks on what they want considered. Do you want to quickly tell them right as we finish up, like where that, I think someone said, where's the address for the report that you just talked about from Toronto Shelter Network? Is it
I'll post it in the comments. It is on the website. The website is a little bit out of date, but on the first page of the Toronto Shelter Network's website, it'll be there. it'll be probably, I think, is it the second or third update on the first page? I think so. I'll pull that up.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Felix.
Thank you.
Again, I want to stress as we're finishing up, please don't let this be the end of your work when you sign off. Please take the call to action when we put this information up, the videos, the resources that are up on TransFormed right now. When this report goes up, please take time to individually look through them, but also take it back to your staff. So in a minute, I want to invite MedTrack staff member Paola to talk a little bit about evaluation for this day. Evaluations are really important to us. We really, really would like participants to fill that out because it's important for us to know what your experience was like and what to keep in mind moving forward. The feedback from these evaluations are really key and critically important to us. Please take some time today or whenever you can to fill them out. We'll also be emailing participants as a reminder if you haven't.
So we'll bring Paola up into the spotlight now, and or Maisha, do you want to wrap up? I'll get Paola ready and you can wrap up. And
sure, yeah. I guess as we're also waiting for Paola, I can add in, the City of Toronto just did a bunch of focus groups about getting like community feedback on what changes to make to different forms of providing community support. So that I know for a fact is going to have a lot of recommendations on disability from participants who have experiences of negative things because of their disabilities. So look out for that, and hopefully that is going to be helpful as well. And I think Paola is here.
Yes. Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Paola, and I work at MedTrack as the equity manager. And I also have been working extensively since, I think, about last year on the TransFormed evaluation of the project. And so a key component of this project is evaluations, because we want to ensure that the participants and the community has a voice in creating and shaping new programs and services. And so the evaluations are essential as well, because they go directly to the Public Health Agency of Canada, and they help inform future programming. And so right now, as I understand it, there's about 50 plus or so participants here online with us. So thank you all very much for coming. And you'll see in front of you a link to the evaluation, and you'll also see a QR code. So if you do have a phone with you, you're more than welcome to scan that code, or you can directly copy and paste the link into your web browser and fill out the evaluation. It is a very quick and short evaluation. And again, we just would very much like your feedback so that we can inform future programming and also convey your voice to the Public Health Agency of Canada. So we're going to take a few minutes, if you don't mind, just to sort of sit on this page so that everybody can have a chance to fill out the evaluation. And so let's perhaps, if I may, Maisha and Laura, take about 3 to 4 minutes just to stay on this page so that people have the opportunity to fill out the evaluation.
Sorry, I was on mute. I said yeah, but that's
okay, wonderful. Thank you.
thank you, Paola. And while people are filling it out, I don't know if I can't see right now because I'm sharing the screen, if there's any final questions in the Q&A while people are filling out the evaluation.
I don't see any right now. But if you have any, feel free to send them in, and I have them up, so I'll take a look.
Maisha, can I add one thing?
Yeah.
All right. So Felix again. I meant to say this in the speaking component, but I wanted to add that when consulting gender diverse people, disabled people, I would recommend hiring them on in a consulting capacity, rather than giving like $10 honorariums. Like a lot of people find that insulting, and it takes up a lot of time, and it also just it's exploitation. So I would really recommend empowering people by like bringing disabled folks, trans folks, people of color actually onto your teams. And if they're going to be like doing that educational work, paying them separately for that education work. Yeah, that's another thing I would recommend. Thank you.
Yeah. I think, Paula, someone has a question about the form very quickly. They're saying, what question are you signed in from?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question, Maisha.
Oh, no worries. Someone's asking the question, where are you signed in from? They're asking like what city they're from.
Yes, what city? So what city would be helpful in terms of, reach?
I do see we have 3 more minutes, and I want to honor everyone's time and the interpreting team's time. So as you're finishing up the evaluation, I just want to say we hope you come back tomorrow to join us for day 3. It's the final day where we're taking a look at trans and non-binary intersections and all the focus groups that we held and the information from that. And at the end of that, from 4:15 to 5:15, we have our final webinar, Peer-Led Approaches, where we're getting into a lot of deeper details on what participants suggested in wanting more peer community and peer-led environment. And thank you so much for staying today and listening to everything. We really hope you're able to take this back and have gotten a lot out of it.
Thank you everyone for being here, and we hope to have you participate tomorrow. And there's still time to register.